Sharpton happened in Franklin County back in July.
A lot better for our community that he's not out on the street, that girls are safer without him wandering.
She made one phone call to cancel dinner with her family. And then the world went silent. Megan had spent years building something real, something worth celebrating. She was weeks away from the finish line, and everyone who loved her could feel the momentum of her life pulling forward like a current. But on the evening of July 1st, 2012, she stepped out of her apartment in Tullahoma, Tennessee, chasing one more opportunity, one more way to get ahead, and she never came back. What happened in the hours that followed would devastate a community, shatter a family, and leave a wound in a small Tennessee town that has never fully healed. The girl behind the name. Her full name was Erica Megan Sharpton, but nobody called her Erica. To her mother, her siblings, her co-workers, and the friends who lit up when they talked about her, she was simply Megan. She was 24 years old, born and raised in a family that moved around before eventually planting roots in Tullahoma, Tennessee, a quiet, close-knit town of roughly 20,000 people, sitting just over an hour south of Nashville. Tullahoma was the kind of place where most people knew each other, where front porches still got used, and where news, good or bad, traveled fast. It was home. And for Megan, it was the backdrop against which she was quietly building something extraordinary. To understand Megan Sharpton, you have to understand that she was not someone who stood still. She was relentlessly in motion, working, studying, planning, pushing. Her best friend described her as genuinely funny, the kind of person whose humor was quick and warm rather than performed. She was outgoing in a way that felt effortless, the type who remembered your name, asked follow-up questions, and actually listened to the answers. She had a laugh that people remembered. She had opinions. She had edges. She was, in every sense of the word, fully alive. But what defined Megan more than anything else was her drive. From an early age, she understood that the life she wanted was not going to be handed to her. It had to be earned. And she was more than willing to earn it. While many people her age were still figuring out what direction to point themselves in, Megan had already chosen her path: nursing. She wanted to care for people. She wanted to be in the room when it mattered, to be the steady presence that patients and families leaned on during the hardest moments of their lives. It wasn't a casual interest. It was a calling she had been working toward with every ounce of energy she had. 2 jobs and a dream. To fund that dream, Megan worked. She worked a lot. She was juggling 2 part-time jobs simultaneously while completing her nursing program at the Tennessee Technology Center, a schedule that would have broken many people but seemed to energize her. During the day and into the evenings, she waitressed at a local steakhouse, where co-workers would later remember her as reliable, warm, and always professional. She also worked shifts at a nursing home, not just for the income, but because she genuinely wanted the hands-on experience. She was already living the career she was studying for, learning the rhythms of care work before she even had her credentials. Her co-workers at the steakhouse were stunned when they heard the news. One colleague told reporters they simply could not process it. Megan never seemed like someone in any kind of trouble, never carried tension into work, never gave any indication that danger was circling her life. She was just Megan. Reliable, funny, hard-working Megan, who was almost done with nursing school and had her whole career in front of her. She was 2 months away from graduating. 2 months. The people she loved. Megan came from a big family, and family meant everything to her. Her mother, Kelly Sharpton, was one of her closest anchors. A woman who spoke about her daughter with a fierce, aching pride that never dimmed even in the darkest days that followed. Kelly had made a promise to support her children through college, work, And watching Megan approach that finish line was the fulfillment of something deeply personal for both of them. Megan's younger brother looked up to her in a way that went beyond ordinary sibling admiration. According to Kelly, he went to Megan for most of his advice and needs. She was his compass. She also had a sister, Carrie, and it was a planned visit from Carrie, who was traveling in from out of town, that set the events of July 1st in motion. Megan had made dinner plans with her mother and sister. A simple family evening, the kind of ordinary gathering that people never think to treasure until it is gone. She called her mother that afternoon, excited and apologetic in equal measure. A last-minute job opportunity had come up, she explained. Someone was looking for a caregiver for an elderly woman, and Megan had been recommended. There might even be upfront payment if things went well. Her family understood immediately. This was Megan. Of course, she wasn't going to turn down an opportunity like that. They told her good luck. They said they would catch up with her later. At home, she shared an apartment with her partner of 3 years, a man named Chris. Their relationship, by several accounts, had its complications. Described by her sister as having real ups and downs, the kind of friction that comes when two people are figuring out how to build a life together under financial and emotional pressure. But Chris cared about her. That much would become painfully clear in the hours and days that followed, when his world collapsed along with everyone else's. The silence that followed. The hours after Megan left for that interview passed without a single word from her. No call to say it went well. No text to reschedule dinner. No answer when her family and Chris tried to reach her. As midnight approached and then passed, worry began to calcify into something harder and colder. This was not like her. Megan was someone who stayed in contact, who checked in, who showed up. By the time the clock moved past midnight and into July 2nd, the people who loved her most were no longer just worried, they were afraid. And somewhere out on a dark, empty road in Franklin County, the reason for that fear was already burning. Part 2. The Killer's Shadow. In a town as small as Tullahoma, most people had at least a passing familiarity with Donnie Jones. Not because he was remarkable, not because he was magnetic or memorable in any particularly striking way, but because men like Donnie Jones have a way of orbiting the edges of small communities for years, known to law enforcement, known to neighbors, known to the kind of people who deal in whispers and warnings, without ever quite being stopped. He was background noise, a familiar name on a familiar list, and that familiarity, that dangerous ordinariness, is precisely what made him so lethal. The man behind the record. Donnie Frank Jones Jr. was 37 years old in the summer of 2012. He had lived most of his life in and around the Tullahoma area, embedded in the same community fabric as the people he would eventually prey upon. On the surface, he was a husband and a father. He had several young children at home, a wife who worked, and the outward appearance of a man simply trying to get by. Neighbors and acquaintances who encountered him casually would later struggle to reconcile the person they thought they knew with what the evidence ultimately revealed. This is a pattern that appears again and again in cases like this one. The predator hiding in plain sight, normalized by proximity, protected by assumption. But beneath that surface, Donnie Jones had a history that told a very different story. By the time Megan Sharpton crossed his path, he had accumulated 21 prior felony convictions. 21. The charges spanning his record included aggravated burglary, aggravated assault, and forgery. A trail of documented violence and criminality that stretched back years. He had also been accused of rape previously, a charge that cast a long and damning shadow over his history with women. At various points, he had served as a police informant, trading information for leniency, a role that kept him in orbit around law enforcement without ever being truly held accountable for the full weight of his actions. He was, in the language of the criminal justice system, a known quantity. And yet, he was free. The psychology of control. To understand what Donnie Jones did to Megan Sharpton, it is necessary to understand something about the psychology of predatory behavior, specifically the kind that is deliberate, calculated, and patient. This was not a crime of sudden passion or situational chaos. The evidence that investigators would later piece together revealed a man who planned, who prepared, and who selected his target with cold intentionality. The experts who study predatory violence often describe a particular profile. Individuals who feel a deep, consuming need for dominance and control, who view other people not as human beings with interior lives and inherent worth, but as objects to be acquired and discarded. These individuals are frequently skilled at performing normalcy. They maintain relationships, hold conversations, smile at neighbors. The mask is not incidental. It is the mechanism. It is how they survive among people who would otherwise recognize the danger they represent. Donnie Jones fit this profile with disturbing precision. He was not someone who appeared visibly unstable or overtly threatening to casual observers. He was a father who drove his kids around. He was a husband whose wife went to work every day. Yes, he was someone who ran small errands and had conversations at the counter of local stores. And all the while, underneath that performance of ordinary life, something far darker was operating. The hunt begins. What investigators would eventually uncover was that in the period leading up to July 1st, 2012, Donnie Jones was not simply waiting for opportunity to find him. He was actively hunting. Using a burner phone, a prepaid unregistered device purchased specifically to avoid detection, he made a series of calls to women in the Tullahoma area. The calls all followed a similar pattern. He was looking for someone to care for an elderly relative, he said. He needed a caregiver. Was the person available? The calls went to women who worked in nursing, who cared for the elderly, who were embedded in the healthcare world in some capacity. He was not dialing randomly. He was targeting a specific type of person, someone whose professional instincts would make them sympathetic to the request, someone whose career aspirations might make them eager to take on extra work. He made multiple calls. Most went nowhere. But Donnie Jones was patient. He had done this before. According to prosecutors, there was a prior incident in 1998 in which he had allegedly attempted to kidnap two young women, forcing them into a car and demanding they drive him to the interstate. The case spoke to a pattern of predatory behavior toward women that had been present in his history for well over a decade before Megan ever answered the phone. The connection to Megan Donnie Jones knew of Megan Sharpton, not well and not intimately, but enough. Approximately a year before the summer of 2012, Megan had occasionally carpooled to nursing classes with his wife Naomi. It was a casual, practical arrangement between two women navigating the same educational program. Megan and Naomi were not close friends. By Naomi's own account, she barely knew Megan and did not particularly like her. The carpooling had been brief and unremarkable, but Donnie had been watching. He remembered the young nursing student his wife had mentioned. He retrieved Megan's phone number through Naomi's phone, without his wife's knowledge or consent, and he began to construct his plan. He would use Naomi's name specifically, weaving it into the false job offer to create a sense of legitimacy and safety. If Megan heard a familiar name attached to the opportunity, she would be less likely to hesitate, less likely to question, less likely to be afraid. It was a calculated manipulation, designed by someone who understood how trust worked and knew exactly how to weaponize it. The trap is set. In the days before July 1st, Donnie asked his acquaintance Timothy Gifford, known as Timmy, a small-time drug dealer in the area, to purchase the prepaid burner phone on his behalf. Donnie claimed he had recently had surgery and couldn't make the trip himself. He paid Timmy with prescription painkillers. The transaction was casual, unremarkable on the surface. Timmy had no idea what the phone would be used for. Donnie also began making arrangements around his truck, a red pickup that he would soon hand off to Timmy's brother under the guise of wanting a trade. The interior of the truck had been recently and hastily refurbished. New carpet, new fittings, His explanation to those who noticed was simple and domestic. His wife thought it would sell better with a cleaner interior. Nobody pushed back. Nobody looked closer. On the afternoon of July 1st, 2012, Donnie Jones made a phone call to a young woman who was just 2 months away from graduating nursing school. He used a fake name. He used his wife's identity as bait. He gave her a handwritten address that did not exist, 850 Shelfer Road, and a set of directions that led not to a home or an elderly woman in need of care, but to a desolate stretch of rural Tennessee where no one would hear anything and no one would come. Megan answered. She was excited. She wrote down the address. She told her family she would see them later. She got in her car and drove toward the trap that had been waiting for her. July 1st, on 2012 began like any other summer Sunday in Tullahoma. The air was hot and dry, the kind of heavy Tennessee heat that sits on your shoulders and doesn't let go. People moved a little slower on days like this. The town breathed quietly. And somewhere in that ordinary stillness, Megan Sharpton woke up in the early afternoon. She had worked a late shift the night before and began moving through what should have been one of the last unremarkable days of her life. She had plans, simple, beautiful plans. Her sister Carrie was in town visiting from out of state, and the family had arranged to gather at Kelly's house for dinner. It was exactly the kind of evening Megan would have loved. Loud, warm, everyone talking over each other, the particular comfort of being surrounded by people who had known you your whole life. She showered. She got ready. She was planning to head over as soon as she was set. And then her phone rang, the call. The man on the other end of the line was calm and polite. He explained that he was looking for someone to sit with his elderly grandmother, to provide care and companionship. He mentioned that Naomi had recommended her, and that name, familiar and trusted, did exactly what Donnie Jones had calculated it would do. It lowered Megan's guard. It made the opportunity feel legitimate. It made the stranger on the phone feel connected to her world rather than outside of it. He told her there might even be upfront payment if things worked out. For a young woman working 2 jobs while finishing nursing school, carrying the financial weight of building a future largely on her own terms, this detail mattered. It wasn't greed that made her interested. It was the simple, practical logic of someone who had been working hard for years and knew the value of an unexpected opportunity. Megan called her mother Kelly and explained she would have to reschedule dinner. She was sorry, she said. She would make it up to them. Kelly heard the excitement in her daughter's voice, the bright, forward-leaning energy of someone who felt like things were falling into place. They wished her luck. They said they would catch up with her soon. It was one of the last conversations Kelly would ever have with her daughter. The drive Megan got into her 1995 red Ford Mustang and followed the handwritten direction she had been given. The address, 850 Shelfer Road, did not exist. It was a fabrication. A carefully constructed piece of bait designed to draw her away from the town, away from people, away from any possibility of help. The directions led her toward a remote and desolate stretch of rural Tennessee, the kind of road you would have no reason to be on unless you were going somewhere specific, or unless someone had told you to go there. What happened when Megan arrived at that location has been reconstructed by investigators through physical evidence, cell phone data, and the forensic record left behind. The details are difficult. They are the kind of details that demand to be handled with care, because behind every clinical fact is a young woman who was terrified, who fought, who did not deserve a single second of what was done to her. Donnie Jones was waiting. What was done? The autopsy report confirmed that Megan was raped before she was beaten. The assault was brutal and prolonged. Investigators determined that she was struck with devastating force. The blunt force trauma to her skull was so severe that the bone was nearly shattered. Medical examiners concluded that the weapon used to beat her was almost certainly the same gun that ultimately killed her. A bullet fired through her cheek ended her life. She was 24 years old. The location where she was killed, confirmed later through GPS data and the discovery of physical evidence, was a farm property belonging to Donnie Jones's family. It was remote, private, and known to him. It was not a place anyone would stumble upon. It was chosen deliberately, as everything in this crime had been chosen deliberately. After she was dead, Donnie Jones did not leave. He continued to act with the cold, methodical focus of someone who had thought through what came next. He removed her identification, her keys, her purse, and her phone. He removed her clothing from the waist down. He then transported her body, driving through the darkness of rural Franklin County, to a Vault road, a secluded stretch flanked by trees, far from any homes or regular foot traffic. The nearest building was a church approximately half a mile away. The nearest residence was across a bridge. It was not a place people stopped. It was a place people passed through. He arranged her body in the grass at the tree line and set her on fire. His intention, prosecutors would later confirm, was to destroy the forensic evidence of the rape. The fire was not rage. It was calculation. It was a man who had committed an atrocity and was now methodically attempting to erase it. He left no car nearby. He left no trace of himself visible to the eye. He walked away into the Tennessee night and drove home to his family. The discovery. It was just past 1:20 in the morning on July 2nd when two teenagers driving down Vault Road saw the fire burning in the trees. The night was dark and the flames were visible from the road, alarming, spreading, the kind of fire that looks like it could become something much larger. They pulled over and called emergency services, assuming a forest fire had broken out, or perhaps a campfire had been left unattended. First responders arrived quickly and began working to contain the blaze. It did not take long before the reality of what they were looking at became impossible to mistake. The fire had been set around a human body. As officers moved closer, the severity of what had been done became visible in ways that would stay with the first responders for the rest of their careers. One officer later commented on how visible the trauma to Megan's skull was. The physical evidence of the violence she had endured was stark and undeniable, even before any formal examination had taken place. There was no identification on or near the body, no purse, no phone, no keys, no car parked anywhere in the vicinity. The woman in the grass was naked from the waist down, and she was alone, and she had clearly been brought here rather than having come here on her own. The town wakes up. By morning, news was moving through Tullahoma, the way news moves through small towns. Fast, fragmented, and frightening. A woman's body had been found burning on a rural road in the middle of the night. No one knew who she was yet, but the fear that settled over the community in those early hours was immediate and visceral. This was not the kind of thing that happened here. This was not the world Tullahoma understood itself to be. A Facebook post describing the victim, a woman with star tattoos on her ankle and the back of her neck, reached Kelly Sharpton before any official notification did. Kelly knew instantly. She didn't need confirmation. The star tattoos were Megan's, one on her ankle representing each of her siblings, one on her neck. Kelly called it in. The identification was made. The family was notified. And a community that had gone to sleep the night before believing itself to be safe woke up to the knowledge that one of their own, a 24-year-old nursing student 2 months from graduation, had been taken, brutalized, and burned on the side of a road while the rest of them slept. The investigation had officially begun, and somewhere in Tullahoma, the man who had done it was already back home, sitting among his children, waiting to see what would happen next. Part 4: The Hunt and Justice. In the hours after Megan Sharpton's body was identified, the Franklin County Sheriff's Department and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation moved quickly. The community was frightened. A young woman had been lured, assaulted, murdered, and set on fire on a quiet rural road, and whoever had done it was still out there. The pressure to find answers was immediate and immense, but investigators understood that pressure alone does not solve cases. Evidence does. Patience does. And in the weeks that followed, it would be a combination of both that ultimately brought Donnie Frank Jones Jr. to justice. Starting with the closest circle. The first people investigators looked at were those closest to Megan. This is standard investigative procedure. Statistically, the people most likely to harm someone are the people already in their life. Her partner Chris was brought in for questioning relatively early. Megan's own sister admitted that her first instinct had been to wonder about his involvement. She had described the couple as oil and water, acknowledging openly that their relationship had its share of turbulence. Chris told investigators the last time he tried to reach Megan, she hadn't answered. When she didn't come home that night, he had assumed she had stayed at her mother's house. He had gone to sleep. A search of the apartment produced blood in the bathroom as well as drug paraphernalia, enough to bring both Chris and his roommate Robbie in for deeper questioning. But the interrogation process quickly separated the two situations. Robbie admitted the needles were his, a private struggle he had been managing alone, unknown to either Chris or Megan. He also disclosed something that visibly shook the room. He and Megan had been involved in a secret relationship. Investigators momentarily considered whether Chris had discovered the affair and acted out of rage. But Chris's reaction to hearing the news for the first time was unambiguous. He was devastated, visibly shaking. Officers in the room recalled his grief as raw and genuine. His workplace alibi was solid. He was ruled out. Robbie's phone records told their own story. He had been texting Megan repeatedly throughout the night she disappeared, growing increasingly worried about her silence. He too was cleared. The name nobody expected. It was Chris who gave investigators their first real thread to pull. He remembered that on the day Megan had last been seen, a man had called one of her phones about a caregiving opportunity for his grandmother. The name mentioned in that call, the person who had supposedly recommended Megan for the job, was Naomi. Chris didn't know many people named Naomi. The only one he could connect to Megan's world was a woman she had briefly carpooled with during her nursing program the previous year. Police tracked down the address for this Naomi and went to her home. She wasn't there. They obtained her number from a neighbor and called. What Naomi told them was unexpected. She hadn't recommended Megan for anything. She barely knew her. Their entire relationship had consisted of sharing a car to class a handful of times. She wouldn't have recommended her for a job, she said. She simply didn't know her well enough, and frankly, didn't have a particularly warm impression of her either. She had no idea why her name had been used. Investigators left the conversation confused and frustrated. The lead they had been counting on had dissolved. But the name Naomi stayed in the file. And it would matter again very soon. The burner phone. 12 weeks after Megan's body was found, investigators finally got something concrete. Through painstaking work tracing the prepaid phone that had been used to contact her, they tracked the number back to a specific purchase, a store in Tullahoma where the phone had been bought in cash. The store had security cameras. The footage showed a man purchasing the prepaid phone. At one point during the transaction, he placed his own personal phone on the counter. An inadvertent but critical mistake, one that would help link him to both devices. The cameras followed him outside, where he got into a red pickup truck. The man was identified as Timothy Gifford, known locally as Timmy, a small-time drug dealer known to local law enforcement, but not previously connected to anything approaching this level of violence. Investigators found Timmy and brought him in. He was cooperative. He explained that he had bought the phone as a favor for a friend who had recently had surgery and couldn't make the trip himself. The friend had paid him in prescription painkillers. The friend had also recently given Timmy a red pickup truck to pass along to his brother, a truck whose interior had been very recently and thoroughly refurbished with new carpet and new fittings. The friend's name was Donnie Jones. And Donnie Jones, investigators now realized with the full force of recognition, was the husband of Naomi. Closing in the connection snapped everything into focus. Police returned to the Jones home, this time with far more purpose. Donnie was brought in for questioning. His answers shifted almost immediately. First, he claimed he didn't know Megan at all. Then he suddenly remembered that yes, he had given her and his wife a lift to classes once or twice. He denied knowing anything about the phone. He said investigators were welcome to search his home and take a DNA sample. He had nothing to hide, he said. They searched the home and found nothing of immediate evidentiary value. They took the DNA sample and waited. While the results were pending, Megan's nursing graduation ceremony took place. The ceremony she had been 2 months away from when her life was taken. Her 18 fellow students gathered to celebrate and to grieve. An empty seat was arranged where Megan would have sat. Kelly Sharpton walked across the stage and accepted her daughter's diploma on her behalf, clutching it with the particular dignity of a mother who had promised to see her child succeed and was now fulfilling that promise in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. The DNA match. When the DNA results came back, they were unambiguous. The sample taken from Donnie Jones matched the rape kit performed on Megan. It was a definitive, scientific confirmation of what he had done. He was brought back in. Confronted with the evidence, he pivoted immediately, now claiming that yes, he and Megan had been involved, but that the relationship had been entirely consensual. He was protecting himself with the only defense available. If the sex was consensual, the DNA proved nothing on its own. Investigators knew he was lying. But without additional physical evidence to directly contradict the claim, they were momentarily constrained. The breakthrough came from a different direction entirely. Police received information suggesting that Donnie, a convicted felon, was in possession of firearms, which was a direct violation of federal law. This gave them the legal grounds for a search warrant and an immediate arrest. They moved quickly. Inside the Jones property and on the family's farm, investigators found what they needed. The bullet that had killed Megan, fired through her cheek, was matched to a rifle belonging to Donnie Jones. GPS data extracted from his phone placed him at 3 critical locations on the night of July 1st. The area where Megan was believed to have been abducted, the family farm where she was believed to have been killed, and the roadside location on Awalt Road where her burning body had been found. The burner phone and Donnie's personal phone had moved together through all 3 locations, pinging off the same cell towers in sequence, definitively placing both devices, and therefore Donnie Jones, at every stage of the crime. On the family's farm, partially burned and partially buried, investigators found a scarf. It belonged to Megan, the indictment. On November 5th, 2012, 4 months after Megan's body had been found burning on that rural road, a Franklin County grand jury returned an indictment against Donnie Frank Jones Jr. He was charged with 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, 2 counts of aggravated rape, and first-degree murder. His bail was set at $500,000. He entered the courtroom in shackles on his hands and feet. He pleaded not guilty, he mouthed what he eat, what appeared to be the words, "I didn't do it," to relatives seated in the gallery. Across the courtroom, Kelly Sharpton sat clutching a photograph of her daughter. District Attorney Michael Taylor confirmed that the charges were eligible for the death penalty, though prosecutors did not publicly commit to seeking it. As the case moved toward trial, Donnie Jones, facing the very real possibility of execution, began to consider his options. The plea in February 2013, Donnie Frank Jones Jr. pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Megan Sharpton. In exchange for his confession, the death penalty was removed from the table. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He subsequently attempted to withdraw the plea, in claiming his attorney had pressured him into it and that threats had been made against his wife. Circuit Court Judge Curtis Smith heard the motion and initially granted a new hearing. But the original judgment was ultimately reinstated. Donnie Jones remains in a Tennessee correctional facility today, serving life without parole. In the end, it was the fire he had set to destroy the evidence that preserved it. The flames had not erased what he had done to Megan. They had sealed it into the record forever. When a murder case reaches its legal conclusion, when a verdict is read, when a sentence is handed down, when the courtroom empties and the reporters pack up their equipment and drive away, there is a tendency in the public consciousness to treat the story as finished. Justice was served. The chapter is closed. Move on. But for the people left behind, nothing closes. Nothing moves on. The verdict is not an ending. It is simply the moment when the world stops paying attention, and the real, private, lifelong work of survival begins. For the family of Megan Sharpton, that work has been defined by grief so profound and so relentless that it has claimed more than one life. And for the community of Tullahoma, Tennessee, the summer of 2012 left a mark that no amount of time has entirely erased. Kelly. To understand the full weight of what Donnie Jones took from the world, you have to understand what happened to Kelly Sharpton in the 16 months that followed her daughter's murder. Kelly had been, by every account, a fierce and devoted mother. She had made a promise to support her children through college. She had watched Megan work 2 jobs. "I'll push through nursing school and arrive within 2 months of the finish line." She had accepted Megan's diploma at the graduation ceremony her daughter never got to attend, standing at that podium with a devastation so deep it was almost structural. The kind of grief that doesn't just hurt, it reorganizes you from the inside out. She had spoken publicly and repeatedly about the pain of waking up every morning with the knowledge that her daughter was gone and never coming back. She had sat in courtrooms. She had faced the man who killed her child. She had given interviews, made pleas, answered questions, and carried the unbearable visibility that comes with being the mother of a murdered child in a small town where everyone knows your name and your story. In November 2013, just over a year after Donnie Jones was indicted, and several months after his guilty plea, Kelly Sharpton took her own life. There are no words adequate to the weight of that sentence. A woman who had already lost her daughter to an act of predatory violence was ultimately consumed by the grief that act produced. The officers who had worked Megan's case expressed profound sadness when they learned of Kelly's death. The community, which had rallied around her family through the investigation and trial, was devastated all over again. 2 lives, 1 act of violence, a ripple of destruction that did not stop at the edge of the crime scene. Carrie and the family Megan's sister Carrie has spoken about her sister's legacy with a perspective that is both heartbreaking and quietly powerful. She has said that if Megan hadn't lost her life, she believes with full confidence that Donnie Jones would still be out there, still making phone calls, still constructing false identities, still hunting. The burner phone records revealed that he had called multiple women in the nursing and caregiving field before he reached Megan. She was not his first attempt. She may not have been his first crime of this nature, but she was the one whose death brought him to justice. And Carrie has chosen to hold on to that truth as something meaningful, rather than something merely tragic. Megan put him behind bars for life, Carrie said. She sacrificed her life to keep everybody else in our community safe. That reframing, from victim to protector, is not a denial of the horror of what happened. It is an act of love. It is a sister refusing to let the story of Megan's life be entirely defined by the way it ended. It is the kind of meaning-making that grief sometimes demands, because the alternative is an abyss with no bottom. Megan's younger brother, who had looked to her for guidance and advice in ways that went beyond ordinary sibling relationships, has carried the loss of both his sister and his mother in the years since 2012. The family has endured a level of compounded trauma that is genuinely difficult to comprehend from the outside. And yet, they have endured. They have continued. They have spoken Megan's name. The memorial, in the place where Megan was found. That dark, tree-lined stretch of a Walt Road in Franklin County, where two teenagers saw fire burning in the early hours of July 2nd, 2012. A memorial now stands. It is 7 feet tall. It is made up of 24 stars, one for each year of Megan's life. The stars are a deliberate and tender echo of the tattoos she wore on her body. The star on her ankle, 1 point for each sibling, and the star on the back of her neck. The same markings that allowed her mother to identify her from a Facebook post, the same markings that in the most painful possible way brought her home. The memorial was built by a community that refused to let her be forgotten. It stands in a place that was meant to be the end of her story and has instead become a place of remembrance and resistance. A physical declaration that Megan Sharpton was here, that she mattered, and that the attempt to erase her failed. Donnie Jones today. Donnie Frank Jones Jr. remains incarcerated in the Tennessee correctional system, who's serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. His attempt to withdraw his guilty plea, claiming attorney pressure and threats against his wife, was ultimately unsuccessful. The original judgment was reinstated by Circuit Court Judge Curtis Smith, and it has remained in effect. He will not be released. He will not have the opportunity to make another phone call to another young woman working toward a better life. The 21 prior felony convictions, the documented history of violence toward women, the calculated and predatory nature of what he did to Megan Sharpton, all of it is now permanently attached to a name that will spend the rest of its existence inside a prison cell. It is not enough. It is never enough. But it is what justice looked like in this case, and it is permanent. What this case reveals: the murder of Megan Sharpton is not simply a story about one predator and one victim. It is a story about systems. The systems that allowed a man with 21 felony convictions and a prior rape accusation to remain free and functional in a community, operating as a police informant, raising children, and constructing the infrastructure of another violent crime without anyone stopping him. It is a story about the vulnerability of ambition, about how the drive to build a better life, to take every opportunity, to work hard and say yes to the next thing, can be weaponized by people who understand how to construct a convincing illusion of legitimacy. Megan did not make a mistake. She was targeted precisely because she was the kind of person she was: conscientious, career-oriented, and responsive to an opportunity that sounded real because it had been carefully designed to sound that way. It is also a story about the secondary casualties of violent crime: the mothers, siblings, and partners who survive the initial act but spend the rest of their lives absorbing its consequences. Kelly Sharpton's death is inseparable from Donnie Jones's crime. The violence did not end on Awalt Road. It continued traveling through the people who loved Megan, finding new places to take root. And it is a story about a small community confronting the reality that safety is never guaranteed by familiarity, that the most dangerous person in the room is sometimes the one everyone already knows. The Diploma. On October 26, 2012, 18 nursing students graduated from the Tennessee Technology Center. 17 of them walked across that stage and accepted their diplomas in person. The 18th diploma was accepted by a mother in an empty auditorium of grief, holding a piece of paper that represented years of her daughter's work, sacrifice, and love. Kelly had said before the ceremony that it would be joyous and heartbreaking in equal measure, that it should have been Megan standing there, that she would accept it on her behalf and carry it forward. She did. She carried it as long as she could. Final tribute. Megan Sharpton wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to be in the room when it mattered, steady, present, and caring for patients and families navigating the hardest moments of their lives. She wanted to touch people in the way that only genuine human care can. She was funny and loud and goal-oriented and real. She had star tattoos that represented the people she loved most. She worked 2 jobs and went to school and said yes to every opportunity because she believed, correctly, that her future was worth fighting for. She was 2 months from the finish line. She deserved every year that was stolen from her. She deserved the career, the patience, the late shifts, the exhausted satisfaction of work that matters. She deserved more dinners with her family, more conversations with her brother, more ordinary Tuesday evenings that nobody thinks to remember until they are gone. The 7-foot memorial on Awalt Road stands in her honor, its 24 stars catching the Tennessee light. A permanent answer to the man who thought he could make her disappear. He was wrong. Her name was Megan. She was almost there. The world is immeasurably less bright without her in it.